Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Lo Sprague, and I welcome you to this evening's event, which is Take Heart Now, Spiritual Tools of Compassion and Centering. In this time of so much turmoil and confusion, fear and upset and cruelty, it's really important that we find ways to hold on to our spiritual center and our compassion. And that's what this series was designed to do. And so each month we bring you someone who can offer a different perspective and can give us those tools that are very human tools. We're not asking for theology, we're not asking for dogma, we're asking for what do you do that helps you through. And we have been blessed this evening with my dear friend and colleague, Bishop John Taylor, who is the Episcopal Bishop of the Diocese of Los Angeles. He has been involved in feeding hungry hearts. He has been part of the program of looking at how we reach out to unhoused people, how we care for people who have been affected by the fires. And he has turned St. Paul's Commons into a hub of true interfaith collegiality and a source of strength for all of our different faith communities. He has been a friend of Gwen's and the Guibord Centers from the very, very, very beginning. And I can think of no one who I would rather bring to all of you this evening than my friend and Bishop John Taylor. Bishop John.
Oh, Lo, thank you so much. I'm so grateful, first of all, to you and all of your colleagues at the Guibord Center. I'm so pleased to see Dr. Gwen's picture on the bookcase behind you, for including me among the distinguished, adjective from which I exempt myself, roster of authorities who participated in this series so far. With respect to your more than generous introduction, I think that the main job sometimes of the spiritual leader is to get out of God's way. And those who have contributed to St. Paul's Center becoming, St. Paul's Commons becoming such a thriving interfaith and ecumenical hub surely include you and Mary, and for having introduced us to the Immaculate Heart community as potential collaborators and colleagues who are now our co-tenants and dear friends. So all hail the Guibord Center and its spirit of unity in bringing that spirit to St. Paul's Commons. My first reaction, Lo, to your invitation was to say that I am perhaps the least qualified spiritual leader ever when it comes to the question of how one finds spiritual peace in times of spiritual warfare. And these indeed are the times we're living in, this season in our national life, when our politics reward cruelty, not love, not liberty and justice for all, but cruelty. A time when neither national leaders or, one must say so far, the preponderance of Americans even flinch at the idea of destroying programs that could save millions of lives beyond our shores in the next year alone, as USAID is cruelly deconstructed. A season when heretics proclaim that empathy is a sin and that Christ commands us to love our family first and our neighbor last, if at all, as if we would need the gospel to figure that out. Because I'm not by nature at peace. I'm an anxious person. I wake up worrying, even when I have nothing to worry about. Actually, having worries, as I sometimes do, has a magnifying and amplifying effect, but the worry is always lurking. I'm going to stay with this element just for a moment
Mhm.
just in the event I'm amid fellow sufferers. If you bounce out of bed like a happy Easter bunny every morning, excited to take on the day, this part of the presentation is not for you. I've learned to understand anxiety and worry as substances which have their own independent reality, whether as a consequence of my biology or upbringing, the effects of the night's unremembered dreams, my moral and ethical architecture. It doesn't matter very much at this point. Anxiety and worry are always with me like characters in a play, and they'll attach themselves to any available challenge in my day. So either they're going to use me for their shadowy purposes, these potential villain characters, or I will use them for the glory of God and the sake of God's people. This is the essence of my particular spiritual challenge. My other disqualifying characteristic, when I was enumerating them in my mind when I heard from Lowe, and it's no doubt related to the first, is that I am not much of a contemplative, or at least I used to persuade myself of this. Anxiety and worry stimulate the monkey mind, which interferes with peace of mind. Even the Dalai Lama will admit to experiencing the monkey mind from time to time. Imagine how it is for worry wards. The emotional insecurity in which my anxiety and worry are rooted once persuaded me that meditation wouldn't even work. I imagine an inner voice saying, "Sorry, John, but when it comes to inner peace, you are out of luck." But I don't think any of us follows a God or an expression of the divine who works that way. The peace of heaven is always within our grasp, wherever we are, whomever we're with. So now, whether you're in the bouncing out of bed like a bunny rabbit party, or you're my fellow worried fellow traveler, either way, my prescription for these cruel times has three elements: incoming, outgoing, and indwelling. I'll say that again. What I take in, what I project onto the world, and what I cherish in my heart as mine forever. When
Mhm.
I talk about incoming, I'm talking principally about how I choose to consume the news of the day. I'm a former journalist. I'm from a family of journalists, and I spent the first half of my vocational career working for a newsmaker, namely a pretty controversial former president, Richard Nixon. I've been a subscriber and daily reader of the New York Times for half a century. It is often said that one of the reasons that resistance to Trump has until last weekend been relatively restrained so far is that millions of people just couldn't contend with the reality of our political circumstances. And I think that sense of crisis and tenderness and vulnerability is built into this whole series of reflections that the Guibord Center has invited us to undertake. Some people said they were going to pay less attention to politics and more attention to the things over which they had more control. And I do get that. It's another speech. But in a way, it's all about local action and the empowering effects of local action, especially now. But either way, tuning out the news isn't an option for me. First, it's not in my nature. And I'm sure most of you will agree that it's not responsible for a citizen and spiritual leader to be uninformed.
Yep.
During Trump's first administration, I awoke every morning at 5 or 6 in the morning and doom scrolled. And I know that you can relate to that, some of you. I declared independence from doom scrolling at the beginning of the Biden administration. And instead, I made a commitment to daily Spanish study. I'm about to hit 1,500 straight days on Duolingo. The choice I made this round was to tune out broadcast news completely. I don't watch television news or cable news. I don't listen in the car. My only exception is long form interviews on podcasts such as Fresh Air and Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend. I still read as much as I can. My monthly subscription bill would startle you. but I don't do it all day long. I've turned off the notifications on my phone. If the stock market falls 2,000 points, I'll be the last to know. I read broadly enough to know I'm getting the full story, however, undistracted by people interrupting one another with their shouted opinions. I consume news according to my schedule, not according to Ted Turner's 24/7 news channel effect. I don't let the news ambush me anymore. Instead, I sneak up on it when it is least prepared. The spiritual dividend is that I'm still worried, but I'm not obsessed. I'm attentive, but I'm not overly distracted. I'm able to devote more of my emotional and spiritual energy to the work before me. Now, when I talk about controlling my outgoing, or at least being conscious of it, which is the energy I project onto the world, it's in the light of the wisdom of the letter of James in the New Testament, which contains these words in the first chapter. Let everyone be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger, for your anger does not produce God's righteousness. Make no mistake, it's hard to get through these times without relying on a cold and righteous anger at cold, heartless injustice. But there's a calculation to this kind of carefully calibrated anger. It is a purposeful taking on of a prophetic stance and voice that shouldn't be done lightly or impulsively. It must always be rooted in good spiritual and scriptural soil. And only after we've identified a gospel value that's being disrespected and then heard the Holy Spirit invite us to intervene and speak by enunciating a gospel value in response, such as the dignity of every human being. So I have a sense of righteous anger, and I know many of you share it, at the way trans and non-binary people have been victimized for political profit by this administration. I have a sense of righteous anger at the lies they have told about our Haitian neighbors and the millions of immigrant workers paying their taxes and caring for their families. But I want to be angry at the wicked value. I don't necessarily want to be angry at the person enunciating it. And I don't want to be angry at people just because of the way they voted. I'll get back to that in a minute. Now, I don't want to be angry at people, but I'm tempted. I can't model peace if I live my life as though I am at war. But sometimes I am weak and I forget. Since Kathy and I are retiring next year and planning to buy a house, we're beginning to explore neighborhoods. Sometimes we'll be driving down a suburban street and I'll see a street with a preponderance of Ford and Ram pickups. And I'll come to the conclusion that there may be more people I agree with politically on streets that exhibit more non-US made sedans. This kind of judgment is tempting, but illogical. Plenty of people I agree with drive pickups. And it's the kind of thing that leads away from reconciliation, peace, and love. Some of the energy in our culture right now is inviting us to be angry at Tesla owners, not just the owner of Tesla, mind you, but millions of the owners of his cars. Just 2 years ago, I would look at a Tesla and I would think of its driver as someone who had made the responsible commitment to leave fossil fuels behind. Now, the winds have changed, but some of our neighbors have sunk 30 or 40 grand into these vehicles and indeed into their green principles, and they can't necessarily abandon these vehicles as a political gesture. Marketers, they can tell us a lot about our politics by the cars we drive and the music we listen to. But my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ didn't think like a marketer. He ate with sinners and outcasts, and he would want me to break bread with pickup drivers and Tesla drivers and Toyota Corolla drivers alike. Jesus doesn't want me to judge someone according to their consuming, according to their nation or race, their orientation, their identification, their vote, their political party, their socioeconomic status, or any other source of division or difference that springs from the world. My faith instead commands me to reckon everyone as a beloved child of God. And I know I'm enunciating Guibord Center principles to judge no one lest I be judged, and to jump to no conclusions about someone without knowing their story, without knowing their fears and joys, without knowing a little bit about their pains and sorrows. Needless to say, these values also invite us to intentional kindness in our most important relationships at home, at work, and with strangers we encounter in the course of our day, from the Starbucks line to a busy freeway. Because, as I think we all know, love is the only thing that works. Because the only way to get the world we want is to look at everything we abhor and then to be and do the opposite. If I ridicule and judge others, how can I advance the purposes of the all inclusive realm of God? The hardest challenge some of us have in our republic is making peace with those who vote or advocate for leadership that we consider unjust and unrighteous. If we have safe settings for civil debates in person, in family or work groupings, online, these can only advance God's purposes of reconciliation and love. We've got to contend with our differences and share them with one another to make progress and to synthesize a new way. But while blanket condemnation of masses of people based on who they are and what they believe, that may be the mother's milk of today's politics, but it turns sour in the stomach of the faithful. It tears sibling from sibling, parent from child, friend from friend, neighbor from neighbor. Spiritual leadership for all of us instead has to be fixed on the realm of justice and love and on mighty, continual, individual acts of reconciliation with the goal of everyone getting to the sacred places together, nobody left behind. As I close, I know I'm among far more skilled practitioners of my third subject, which I called indwelling. This is the territory of God's realm which lies inside me, where potentially I should be able to find, according to my faith and according to the testimony of expert practitioners of the spiritual practices, I should be able to locate an inextinguishable source of peace and comfort. The Episcopal Prayer Book, with which some of us are familiar, has 4 daily devotions in the front, which I've memorized. They're called prayers for individuals and families. They go along with morning, midday, evening, and nighttime prayer in the ancient daily office practice. There's a reading for noonday prayer. I often say this in the midst of a well-planned and organized day that has already gone completely off track. So this apt reading is from Isaiah. O God, you will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are fixed on you. For in returning and rest we shall be saved. In quietness and trust shall be our strength. We are promised peace if we fix our minds on God. Not just peace, but perfect peace. Credit it or not, the prophet's promise is unconditional. It doesn't rely on certain people being in office. It doesn't rely on our getting our way in a conflict with a loved one or a colleague. It doesn't depend on the presence in our lives or in our society of systems rooted in justice and democracy. It doesn't depend on good health or creature comforts. It depends on the discipline of fixing our attention on God while quieting every other whisper or echo in our minds. Now, it's at this point in the evening where wiser practitioners of the meditative art should be prepared to enter the conversation in just a few minutes when we go to a period of back and forth and Q&A. But even for me, my colleagues in faith, it works. I know that wherever I am, I can quiet my mind, slow my breathing, and find the peace of the presence of the God of love. I concentrate inwardly without speaking on the Jesus prayer, which has been traced, as many of you know, to the desert mothers and fathers of the 5th century after Christ. I repeat over and over, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Do a Google on the Jesus prayer, and you'll find some further guidance. Doing a little research along those lines today, I was amused to find one source that endorsed the use of the Jesus prayer for Christian contemplation, but took pains to point out that this was fundamentally different from non-Christian meditation. I think it's in keeping with the ecumenical and interfaith ethos of the Guibord Center to say that, as a matter of fact, Christian contemplation with the Jesus prayer, or whatever mantra you might choose to use, is exactly the same as non-Christian meditation and takes me to the same front porch of the same divine presence. It works on mountain paths during a walk. It works in doctor's offices and waiting rooms and examining rooms. It works each time we resolve to reach for the peace of God instead of reaching for our cell phone for yet another round of checking on events over which we have absolutely no control. It works, whoever the president is. It works at demonstrations. And although I've never experienced it, at least so far, I'm pretty sure it works when you're waiting at the police station to be booked following your arrest for peaceful civil disobedience. The only reason more people don't meditate is that there are relatively few ways to make money from it. People want to sell us a whole range of other medicating as opposed to meditative resources that they can kind of addict us to. But the real stuff is free. I'm also pretty sure that meditation lowers your heart rate and blood pressure, which makes it the opposite of cable news. Now, there are other elements I should stir in as constituents of spiritual health, such as getting enough exercise and sleep, and watching what we eat and drink, and especially drinking plenty of water. But if I've persuaded at least one person to turn off cable news, refocus their anger, and turn on to the power of meditation, all the more reason for me to give thanks once again to Lo for her gracious invitation. Thank you all so much, and God bless.
Thank you, Bishop Taylor. That is certainly very rich. Let me stir it up a little bit by saying to you, when you're driving down that street full of the pickups, what happens when you see a Trump sticker on one of them?
So here's my story about Trump stickers. Um, I, I take it's somewhat reckless because I'm 70 years old, but this might be the last summer I do it. But I like to take a long ride through the Great Southwest. I call it 6 days on the road after a song I first heard from Livingston Taylor. And the second day, I'm always driving from 29 Palms across the desert toward Parker, Arizona. And there is no bleaker or emptier stretch of blacktop in God's creation. And one time, a couple of summers ago, I pulled over for a moment and got myself stuck in the soft shoulder. The reason there are signs that say soft shoulder is if you stir into it, you might find that you can't get your Honda out. And it was about 105 degrees, and I'm not in the best shape. And I did everything I could to get my car out. I found my way to a call box and made a call back to 29 Palms for somebody to come, and they never came. And I'd been at this for about an hour, and I was beginning to wonder about my water supply. And this family came along in a big trailer with a big Trump sticker. And there I was with my Honda, and they spent about half an hour pulling me out of the sand. And in the course of all this, I was beginning to feel a little bit sick. And so they had me go sit in the air-conditioned cabin of the trailer while they pulled my car out. And they wouldn't even take $20. So whenever I see a Trump sticker, I think of that experience. I'm not wild about Trump stickers, but I also I can't be at war with 75 million of my fellow Americans. I think what I want is a system where there are a couple of choices that everybody has, both of which have a snowball's chance. This is not a political forum, but there's all kind of ways that 2024 could have been different. Right now, part of my spiritual practice is to be mad at wicked values by not necessarily associating them with everyone who voted for the regime that does it. Because I know remember enough of my political science training that for what we call the low information voter, which is not to say a dumb voter, the low information voters are just people who are busy living their lives and don't spend as much time as many of us do thinking about politics. And they basically are voting their pocketbook, and all the polling confirms this. The low information voter is just thinking about where they are right now. And I don't want to lay everything this man does at every one of my neighbor's feet.
I think that there will be a number of us borrowing that story of being stuck in the sand the next time we see a Trump sign. So thank you very much for that one, indeed. We invite folks to put some questions or some reactions in the chat. I guess the next thing that I would ask you is, what role does pushback have in any of this for you? What are those actions that you can do, both as an individual in your position, that are able to make some kind of change in the policies and the behaviors that are out there?
Thank you, Lo. It's a good question, and it gets back to the value of local action and also the expectations people have of spiritual leaders. I saw someone wrote just yesterday on social media that they'd come to understand that perhaps 33% of members of the Episcopal Church, church-wide, um, had voted for Trump. Is a reminder of number one, that we're not engaged in partisan politicking. And number two, we're taking care not to make anyone we go to church with feel stigmatized. Not that the preponderance of stigmatizing isn't occurring as a consequence of a regime rooted in cruelty, but it's also possible for people who are kind of innocent bystanders to politics to feel stigmatized because of what they're thought to believe. So it's more important to identify values, and I think the principal one right now, which runs contrary to the prevailing political ethic, is the dignity of every human being from our baptismal covenant. Righteous impatience with and anger at policies that do not respect the dignity of every human being become absolutely vital. And in the Diocese of Los Angeles at this time, as a consequence of the choices which our government has made, we have felt it's particularly important to focus on two issues, not at the exclusion of others, but keep in mind that the architects of the last 2 or 3 months of our national life set out to confound, confuse, and overwhelm the opposition. They wanted it to be a distracting fireworks display of one outrage after another, so it would be hard for the opposition to find its footing. So what we've felt in the Diocese of Los Angeles, because of our neighbors and our particular ecclesiastical ethos, is first of all to focus on the dignity of our trans and non-binary siblings, and to make sure that we're abundantly clear, not just about welcome and inclusion, but impatience with any power or principality which seeks to exclude anyone on the basis of how they've been marvelously made by the Creator. The second is our Sacred Resistance Ministry. I'm grateful to the Guibord Center for putting up information about nonviolence and civil disobedience training. Sacred Resistance has been active in the Diocese of Los Angeles since December of 2016, within a month of the election of Mr. Trump the first time. We seek to make sure that everybody knows their rights. You don't have to be a citizen to have civil rights in the United States, and our folks from ICE seek to confuse us about that. So in multiple languages and in multiple settings at the diocese and in missions and parishes, we've been helping people understand their rights, understand what to do when ICE comes to the door, understand what is to be construed as private property, and we continue to construe all of our church sites and St. Paul's Commons as private property, where the property owner has the right to deny admission to anyone as we may wish, unless they have a warrant signed by a judge. And so in terms of our practical assistance provided to our neighbors who may be undocumented, as well as public testimony from the pulpit and in statements, we're focusing especially on the rights of undocumented people and of trans and non-binary people.
The Guibord Center has been thinking, Bishop John, about doing something around the message that all of our faiths have about how we treat the stranger, how we treat the neighbor. And I would love a reflection from you on that, because I think that that's one of the things that's important to the Guibord Center is that we show that our faith communities come together and have core values, and that this is really a struggle about values, not a struggle about people. And the cruelty certainly says that not everyone is equal and not everyone is precious. And Jesus was pretty clear about his thinking on that. So do you have any thoughts or suggestions about that?
I do, Lo. Thank you. I think, as always, the Guibord Center is riding at the top of the right wave. For people of faith in general, for those focused on ecumenical and interfaith work, now is the moment.
Yeah.
The most clear, pellucidly clear moment in a century. We have in the Episcopal Church been for a couple of generations preoccupied with and agonizing about our apparent decline. Indeed, people who talk about the work of the divine in a way that focuses on, again, these are Orthodox Christian values of love, justice, humility, forgiveness, forbearance, nonviolence. These, of course, come right out of the New Testament. But anybody of any faith who talks about these values has been told consistently over the last generation or two that that way of looking at the world is no longer needed, because civil society has figured out how to essentially internalize those values. And we would tend to look at Western Europe and say, yes, well, it's possible for societies to be just and largely secular. But now we have, in the richest and most influential country in the world, we have, for the first time since the darkest days of the sin of slavery, we have got a government which has figured out how to win by being cruel.
Mhm.
And it is a giant step, a devolutionary step backwards toward a primitive and savage past. And the only antidote that's available are faith values.
Yeah.
But because we are atomized, because we are separate from one another, because we follow our own doctrines and our own beliefs, and we're wedded to them. There's always been that break, that wall that's prevented real sort of values deep, marrow deep, ecumenical and interfaith work that says, no, really, there's some core stuff here that we agree on.
Yeah.
And we need to find that. And the Guibord Center has got a unique way of doing that in a context that combines substance and fellowship in order to make a place for that kind of work. And if we don't do it as people of faith, I'm not sure the American experiment is going to survive the Trump episode. Because those who oppose the politics of cruelty are diffuse at this point. They haven't found their bearing. So we are the people of love, and we need to come on strong. And
Yeah.
love of the stranger is the key to it, because the politics of cruelty is rooted in an intentional misunderstanding of who the stranger is. It takes
Yeah.
strangers, it puts them in giant groups, and it condemns them and attacks them as a group. And it's a time-tested way of tyranny, and we have got the only thing that's going to help society counteract it. So it's not only advisable, Lo, it's essential.
Yeah. Good. Well, I will take that as a yes, you're in it with us. All right. Good. That is our next move. Definitely. All right. We have a question here, or a statement coming from Susan Leary. I personally have been trying to have conversation with folks that have very different political views than myself. I'm not trying to convince, but to listen and ask questions. It is difficult, but I think as people of faith, we need to do more of this. As a religious leader, how can you promote this?
Susan, it's a lovely question because it's a nuanced question, and it points in the direction of the danger of what I'm promoting and what you are courageously venturing. Because this movement of winning through cruelty is dangerous and toxic. It hurts people. I think all of us are familiar enough. Um, Heaven forbid we've experienced it. More likely, by the grace of God, we've studied it and pastored people through it. But those who are suffering from domestic violence, either physical or emotional violence, are conscious of the codependence with the abuser if they can't escape the abuser. If it's, say, not to generalize, but a father figure who hurts and hits people in the family, it's, well, how is he today? Is he in a good mood? If he's a good mood, maybe he won't hit when we come back from school. We have a government like that now.
Yes.
Anyone who has seen their hard-earned wealth evaporate over the last week, only to see now through the beneficence of the Great One, it's now been
Yeah.
restored. We're in a cycle of fear and relief.
Yep.
And there are people who are genuinely being hurt. My desire not to stigmatize Trump voters is a personal discipline, but there obviously does need to be some accountability there. And I don't want to suggest people put themselves in places where they're having conversations in which they're not safe or they're going to be abused.
Yeah.
This works for me, and it's part of my spiritual practice because I don't want to be at war with half the country. But we enter into it if, as I said, the settings are safe and civil, and people are willing to play by the rules and not attack us because we're standing up for love, and not tell us that we're fools and we're ignorant because we're standing up for love. I mean, we got to be careful, and I have to be careful in what I advise people to do. Thank you, Susan.
One of the things that I'm aware of that I think is a huge part of this is when I look at, when I turn on the television set, I think we should probably call it something else these days other than a television set, because it really is a trance induction. But so many of the programs are filled with violence, and so much of our entertainment is around violence. That's in the that's it fills children's games today, and we have come to look at power and overpowering. And I guess the part of the thing that I've been wrestling with is what power do we have? What strategies can we have to tell stories, to lift up stories that are um, considered entertaining, but are not focused on violence? And when I was a kid, long before most of the people on this call were born, Walt Disney had movies, and his movies were all dedicated to having a good ending and an ending that helped you appreciate the other person or the other being. And they might have taken you through a scary time, they often did, but it was all about really coming to some kind of reconciliation and some kind of wonderment at the end of it. That has changed significantly. Uh, when I was a kid, all of the shows ended up with the good guys always winning. That doesn't always happen today. But I guess the question is what role do we have? What place do we have? What actions can we take other than in our personal lives with the way that we respond to the violence around us? But what are some of your thoughts on that, Bishop John?
Thank you, Lo. Your reflection is wiser than anything I can say in response. I will say this because I was thinking about it earlier in a conversation with a colleague. Should we see, as this colleague was telling me they had seen, an increase in aggressive behavior by drivers, aggressive behavior toward pedestrians by people driving too fast or speeding up to just tease people who are in sidewalks, crosswalks. If we're noticing more road rage, if we're noticing more violence in narratives, we have to remember that violence is being modeled and celebrated and rewarded at the highest level. And I fear more than anything that the level of civic and political violence is going to grow worse before it gets better.
Yes.
Um, uh, I am not the world's leading fan of Amy Coney Barrett, but now that she has been a swing vote against Trump,
Yeah.
she's receiving extraordinary hate mail um, out of a out of a political culture into which individuals who sacked the Capitol and beat up on police officers with the encouragement of a politician have now been released and glorified. So, you know, the warriors are not only in the video games, they're out on the streets. And we may get through this without anyone else getting hurt, but if we do, it'll be a small miracle.
Yes.
And so people of love need to be people of nonviolence, not only in action, but also in word. And to the extent that we can get our thoughts under control, we have to find ways to sort of channel our ire into a kind of prophetic direction, as I suggested. Um, uh, I think probably an institution like the Guibord Center could be a place that could develop resources and for wholesome things for people to consume. I think we could have an interesting I think we could take your sort of mission statement a moment ago, Lo, and do a program at the Guibord Center about the changing nature of the stories people are consuming. Because as we become more polarized and as we become strangers to one another, our stories take on more of a kind of an epic good versus evil narrative in which good doesn't always win. So I hadn't thought much about it before. I am concerned about the incipient violence in our politics right now, which has been unleashed by the by you know who.
Thank you. Thank you. And it sounds like we have a further conversation to continue. You also reminded me that when Bishop Budd spoke to the president, as she did so eloquently, that she got thank you notes and letters from so many of us. And it may be that Amy Conant Barrett needs to get some letters of appreciation from many of us as well. Um, I see that Mary Kirchen has a note in here saying, so it's not necessarily about winning, but perhaps recognizing the presence of love in each other and the sharing of that love. How do we help each other love and not polarize by winning? Mm.
If I encounter someone out in the world and our political differences become known to one another, that person is not going to persuade me to change my mind, nor I them. But the Holy Spirit will have brought us together. My faith will recognize the face of God in that person. And I think the way forward is for me to be, as James said, quick to listen, slow to speak. And experts in Christian nationalism who have been guests of our program group on ecumenical interfaith affairs, they will tell us just uh, tell me why that's so important to you. I'm really interested in how you've come around to your point of view. And just learn narrative. Everybody's got a narrative, everybody's got a story. And if we're confident of our values, we can withstand hearing other people's noxious views if we give them a chance to go a little bit deeper and tell us, well, where'd you grow up? Who do you root for in baseball? What kind of music do you like? Kind of basic coffee hour questions. And
Yes.
right now, to me, the real strangers are people who aren't looking at what's going on and saying, this is unendurable. This is impossible. And if my sibling insists that everything's going great, it really prompts my curiosity. I really need to know where they're coming from.
Thank you for an incredibly rich time with us this evening. Thank you all for your questions and your presence. We are so profoundly grateful for all of you. And I remind you that we are for sure all in this together. And with God's grace, we will get through with love and with healing. So we will look to see all of you next month when we are going to have Susan Goldberg be our rabbi, be our from Nefesh, and we look forward to having you next time. And please invite other folks to listen to the tape and be part of this great program. Thank you all.
Thank
Uh,
you, Lo.
have a safe month. God bless. Thank you, Bishop Taylor.
Thank
Thank
My
you,
friend.
everybody.
you.
God bless you.
All right. God bless.